everybody, welcome to the Chess Harbor. My name is Raf, and today I want to start a new opening theory series on the Philidor opening. So the Philidor opening is a defense against the move e4, and there's two ways of reaching it. The main way being with the move e5, knight to f3, and now the pawn to d6. This is the Philidor opening, and after pawn to d4, there is a couple of moves by black, but the most principled one being to take here, and we're going to reach a position that is quite passive because we've given up on a lot of central space, and I don't really like playing this kind of positions because, yeah, they're quite passive. If knight to c6, bishop to b5, bishop to d7, all the black pieces are pretty much just on the defensive, and I want some options to counterattack my opponent, to put some pressure on their center, to really like lay the hurt on them. So that's a bad way to start the game. So that's why my preferred move order is to start with the move d6. It allows white to take the center immediately. It's the most played move. d4, and now knight to f6, immediately putting pressure on their center. They can't push their pawn forward, so the only way to go on is to defend. So there is three moves. Knight to c3 is the main move, f3 or bishop to d3. Those are the three moves that we're going to look at. f3 and bishop to d3, we'll see that in a later video. Right now we're focusing on knight to c3, and in this position we can play the move e5, and we've reached the Philidor position. The only difference being that now there is a knight on c3 instead of a knight on f3, which is a big improvement for us, because a knight on f3 would put pressure on the e5 pawn, and the knight on c3 is only defensive piece right now. And we're going to look at the queenless middle game positions in this video after d takes on e4, d takes on e5. Another main move that we're going to look extensively in multiple videos is the move knight to f3. It's white's best shot at gaining the upper hand in the Philidor. In this kind of positions, we're going to play knight b to d7, and we've reached the so-called lion or Hanham variation in the Philidor. It has recently gained a lot of popularity because world champion Magnus Carlsen has played this in his Rapid and Blitz games very often. There's other GMs like Simon Williams who has made a course about the black lion with h6 and g5, a very aggressive setup. We're going to look at those lines in different videos. They're very interesting as well. But right now we're going to look at the main continuation. In this position, the main move being played about 50% of the time is the move d takes on e5, and leading to the queen trade variation. So as I mentioned, with the knight on c3, there is no risk of immediate taking. So that's a big improvement for us. That's why this variation is actually good. And I really like playing this endgame. This endgame is actually loads of fun for black because our king on d8 is not a target, it's actually an asset. It's going to come into the game very fast, either on c7 or on e7, and it's well centralized, and black's minor pieces and rooks are gonna be very strong. So there's two main moves or two main systems that white faces or is going to play most of the time, and that's either bishop to c4 or bishop to g5. Bishop to g5 would has the immediate threat of long castles with check. Against this variation, we'll see what we have to do in a later video. Right now we're going to focus on the move c4, bishop to c4. And then another move that actually could be dangerous, but it's very underplayed. It's only about 4 or 5% of the games that actually plays that move, is the move f4. That's one of the stronger moves that white can play, looking to exploit the fact that black's king is in the center by opening up the position. We're going to look at that later as well, but this move is looks a bit hard to play for white because you're giving yourself an isolated pawn, but it's actually white's best try. It only occurs in 5% of games. The most important move that you need to know by now is the move bishop to g4, bishop to g5, sorry, and bishop to c4. That's what we're going to look at today. Bishop to c4. Now we have a very interesting idea. We're going to play bishop to e6. we're going to allow white to double these pawns. White should always take the bishop. It's the most principled move. It's their only shot. If they just move back, yeah, you're giving us this great diagonal for our bishop and we have no problems whatsoever. Now it looks like black is already busted. We have two isolated doubled pawns on the e-file. It looks absolutely horrendous, but there is a big upside for black. First of all, these pawns, they control a lot of squares in the center. Second, these pawns, they give us a great shield for our king on e7. The king is actually quite safe in the center. And then thirdly, these pawns are very hard to be targeted. It takes a lot of time to move the bishop around to target it on e5. And it also takes a lot of time to maybe put a knight on d3. So the knight on c6, on c3 does nothing. Knight wants to come to f3, and then a knight wants to come to d3. And with knights on d3 and f3, there might be a threat to our e5 pawn, but that takes a lot of time for white. And we're going to see in the sample games that if you play well with black, you're going to threaten stuff, and white just doesn't have the time to set up their pieces in that way. If black doesn't play active enough, if white managed to draw the game out and go into a long end game and manages to keep the minor pieces on the board, that's the most important part. They want to keep these minor pieces on the board, so the knights on f3, on d3, they might be able to target this weak e5 pawn. But right now there is no good way to do that. So let's look at what black needs to do in order to stay active. The very big another upside is that we have this open f file, or the half open f file. So that's one of the reasons that black has a very quick counterplay. Another idea that we have is bishop to b4 to look to trade on b4, double the pawns. Then the biggest thing that we want to do is either way that white castles, if they go queenside or kingside, we're going to want to push the pawns on that side of the board and activate our rooks. That's the biggest thing that we're going to see in the sample games as well. Right now, it's mostly about ideas in this setup. So our ideal setup would be something like bishop to d6, knight to c6, pawn to a6, and king to e7. That's the ideal setup for our pieces. Why is that? This pawn on e6 controls the d5 and f5 squares, which are both excellent squares for white's knights. They just can't reach that right now. The only annoying thing that white might be able to do is use a b5 square. So that's why we want to play a6 at some point. The knight wants to come to c6 to defend the e5 pawn. And then the king wants to sit on the e7 square where it defends the e6 pawn, and it's actually quite safe and nice centralization. So our bishop to d6 or b5 just to step away so our king can come to e7. So let's look at the sample games, and we're going to see those ideas in action really clearly. So in this first game, the game actually starts from an e5 move order, where my opponent plays d4, the center game, and I respond with d6, which immediately transposes to the Philidor game that we're looking at. So d takes on e5, d takes on e5, and my opponent immediately trades the queens, now puts the knight to f3, but I can respond with bishop to d6. So the reason why I don't respond with knight to c6 is because bishop to b5 could be an annoying pin. And it actually threatens to take my pawn, so that's something I don't want to do. And if I play knight to c6 here, play bishop to b5, and now d6, they have a chance to double my pawns, and in this position I wouldn't want to be black, because I have isolated doubled c pawns, and they're just not good. So my opponent, that's why I played the move bishop to d6. So my opponent responds with bishop to c4, and now we're back into territory that we're looking at. I play bishop to e6. My opponent doubles my e-pawns, plays knight to c3, and now knight to f6. So we're back in our theory. Bishop to g5. That's something I want to mention in this variation. Bishop to g5, it might look threatening, but it's absolutely harmless. You can just ignore this almost completely. The bishop doesn't really threaten the knight because it can just take back. There is no real threat of a pin either because the king can just move, and the king usually wants to sit on e7 anyway. So that's what I played. I played king to e7, and the bishop, it does nothing. The knight currently doesn't hold the d5 square because our pawn already does that job. So the knight wants to move at some point. The only thing that the knight does is maybe threaten the e4 pawn. We're just going to push this bishop back, and usually, yeah, it's just wasted time by white. So white castles, play knight to c6. So remember our ideal setup: knights on f6 and c6, bishop on d6. I'm only missing the pawn on a6 right now, so rook to f1. I play a6. This move stops bishop or knight to b5, trading off the bishop. I want to mention that if, for example, here knight to b5 would happen, that's actually completely fine. You can actually encourage them to take. And after c takes on d6, these pawns are very safe with our king. And at some point we might want to push d5 and take over the center. Now we have a c file to work with. And this position is actually already better for black. So trading knight for bishop is not even an out for white here. It's actually, it gives black some excellent counterplay as well. And this pawn, it might be appearing weak. We can easily cover it with rook to d8, for example. Our king also covers it. So generally this half open c file gives us even better counterplay than the d file would ever do. So that's nothing to be scared about. But in this case, knight to a6, knight to b6, b5 is stopped by a6. So a4, white stops my counterplay with b5, but that's okay. As I said in the theory, usually we want to push the pawns on the side where the king is. So in this case, we want to go king side. So h6, bishop to a4. This is already a mistake because the bishop really belongs on this diagonal, not on this diagonal. So g5, bishop to g3, and now knight to h5. I'm not really looking to take his bishop. I'm looking to plant my knight on this very powerful f4 square, and then I'm going to push my h pawn down the board, and I'm looking to checkmate my opponent. So h3, knight to f4, rook a8, rook h to g8, looking to push my kingside pawns even further. Knight to e2, h5, here they come. Knight takes on f4. This is already a decisive mistake by white. Takes back with the e pawn. I've already undoubled my pawns, but the attack is raging. My pawns are at the gates, and I'm gonna break through here. Now g4, h takes on g4, h takes on g4, knight to d4, and I'm already winning material here. Knight takes on d4, rook takes on d4, and g3. The bishop is completely trapped, and I have a very nice way of winning even more material because this diagonal is also going to open up. F takes on g3, f takes on g3, e5, bishop to c5, and yeah, the game is over. My opponent played a couple of more moves, but after this simplification, he resigned. So a very nice first example of the position where we can already see bishop to g5 being a completely useless move. It only encourages black to start pushing these kingside pawns, and the counterplay comes very fast. We're pushing these pawns up the board, and we're going to open up the position, and our rooks come into the game very easily, and we're just better. Now let's look at the second game. This one does start with the move d6, d4, knight f6, knight to c3, e5, and we see the queen trade again. Now knight to f3, and as I mentioned, we want to defend this pawn with the bishop, not with the knight, because bishop to b5 could be an annoying move. So bishop to g4, again, we can ignore this move. And here I played pawn to c6. Might not be the most accurate move order by me. I could have played bishop to e6 maybe, take control of this diagonal. The reason why I played c6 is because this pawn takes away the squares from the knight. but it might not have been the best move. In this position, yeah, maybe it would have been better just to play bishop to e6, just put the bishop somewhere useful, or I could play knight. I could put my king on e7 right now, and that would also be completely fine. So I played c7 or c6. We're going to see that in the bishop to g5 variations in a different video. Usually our king belongs on c7. That's also one of the reasons why I played this move c6. So my opponent long castles, and that's why I made the space on c7, so my king can step to c7 now. But now finally we see bishop to c4, and I still play bishop to e6, even though my king is on c7 now instead of e7. These pawns still control a big space in the center. So knight to d2, bishop gets kicked with h6, and here, yeah, I have a very nice move. The knight goes to g4, and it pressurizes this bishop. If they allow me to take this bishop, he gets doubled pawns on the e-file as well. Those pawns are going to be weaker than mine because my bishop can easily target them. So my opponent already makes a couple of mistakes here. He starts with knight to c4. I put my bishop on b4 now. It would have been fine as well to just defend with rook to d8, but that's more passive. It's rather better for me to double the pawns on the c-file. So bishop to b4, bishop to d2, and this is just a blunder, of course, because now his pawn on f2 hangs. It was better for him to just allow me to double these c pawns, and we're going to get into a position where he's going to have a very ugly pawn structure, and it's probably better for white to try and hold this kind of position than the position we're going to reach next, which after this position with bishop to d2, I can win the exchange. So I still take one of the rooks. Knight to d7 defends my e pawn once, but it's twice attacked, so white does win back a pawn, but my king hides on b6, and in this position I can start pushing with the rook. I open up some lines, and we're going to go over these moves quite quickly. It's about technique now. The king hides on a6, and now I can finally mop up a pawn on the g-file. And here my opponent also resigned, because there is no stopping this h-pawn or the g-pawn from running up the board. And again, we saw a very quick and nice win where our opponent decides to double the pawns on the e-file, but here we saw a very nice way to win material with the knight coming to g4, which is a theme that really occurs often, also combined with the bishop trying to double the pawns on c3. It's a very important theme as well. Let's look at the third game now. We see e4 again, d6, d4, knight to f6, knight to c3, and the thematic queen trade, bishop to c4 immediately, and bishop to e6. So white takes again. We get our good structure with the pawns. Now knight to f3, and in this case I can defend with knight to c3. There would also be nothing wrong with bishop to d6 to defend that way, but then knight to b5 could trade our bishop, and as I mentioned, it's quite okay. So in this position, let's say that I played bishop to d6, knight to b5, king to e7, takes. This position would also be good, but I'd personally rather keep my bishop for now, and I'd rather try and take the knight here with the bishop instead of letting him trade my knight, his knight for my bishop. So in this case, knight to c6 can be played because there is no bishop b5. So castles, bishop to b4, g5, knight to g5. It attacks my e6 pawn, but I can defend with king to e7. Now my opponent decides to play f3, which I don't really understand. I guess he wants to defend this pawn in case I take here and I kick his knight away. But now the knight is going to get stranded on the h3 square, and it can spin back into the game but it's going to take a lot of time, and he has also weakened this diagonal. So a6 stops his knight from moving, sets up b5. So bishop to d2, rook 88, rook 88 as well, rook 81, knight to d4. Looking at the soft spot on c2, a3. I don't want to trade my bishop. That would be good for white. Let's switch it to this beautiful diagonal. My opponent even helps me with b4, bishop to b6. So I already have a threatening discovered attack, so my opponent does stop that with king to h1, but now his c2 pawn drops, plays knight to a4, and I have a nice intermediate move with knight e3, forking his rooks, so he's forced to trade his bishop for my knight. Now knight to h3, and I decide to simplify. It's the easiest way for me to play. I've won a pawn, and if I can just trade off these minor pieces, this queenside pawn mass is going to win me the game. So knight to c5, I can immediately chop that off. He takes on c5, h6. He plays f4. It's a nice way to try and simplify the game. If I take here, he activates his knight again, but I can just take on e4, and after he takes on e5, I can immediately take on c5. So it's a way for me to win another pawn. If the pawn wasn't on c5, maybe this idea would have been better. Knight to f4, king to d7, knight to h5, g6, knight f6 check, king to c6. So my king is just getting more active while his king is still in the corner, so this endgame is trivial. Let's speed on a bit. It's quite a trivial endgame now. g4, knight d3, knight g8, h5, G takes on h5 twice, knight to f6, h4, knight to g4, king to d5, and we're gonna win a third pawn here. King g2, knight takes on e5, knight takes on e5, and here my opponent played along a bit more, thinking maybe he could win some kind of race, but yeah, he's clearly much slower than I am, and he finally resigned here. Another nice win with the same ideas that we saw before. So after the file opens up, we took some advantage of the d file a little bit, and he weakened his diagonal, leading for a very nice activity with the minor pieces. So again here, white plays in a not active enough way, or plays too actively, leading to me just getting an overwhelming position with the minor pieces. White needs to take a much slower approach and defend instead of allowing us to get activity. So I hope this video explains the lines very well after bishop to c4, bishop to e6, with these very interesting pawn structure. It's definitely a very interesting variation to play. I would almost call it like a Berlin endgame where black is just better. The activity gained with the half open f file and with the minor pieces coming out very quickly, I would say that this position is easier for black to play, even though the engine gives white a slight edge. White has to find a lot of correct defensive moves and needs to play very patiently to eventually maneuver his pieces around and not become worse. I think this is a very interesting variation. You should definitely give it a try. In the next variation, we'll look at the position where white tries to play bishop to g5 with this pin, setting up the discovered or the check with long castles. This position is also very interesting for black, and you definitely need to know that one as well. We'll look at that in the next theory video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys there.